This is the second in a series of resources that look at broad topics in macroeconomics. Part 1 considers the gross domestic product, defining it and each component part, working through a couple of examples, and considering the limitations of the GDP as a measure of welfare. Part 2 considers the difference between public and private goods and looks at certain issues arising from public goods. Part 3 inspects the difference between real and nominal measures, working through an example. Part 4 looks at unemployment, providing definitions for various types of unemployment, and also defining other factors involved in calculating unemployment rates. Part 5 considers the Consumer Price Index, defining it, working through examples, and explaining how the CPI applies to actual real-world problems. Part 6 looks at economic growth, suggesting general methods countries may use to expand their economy. Economists classify certain goods and services as public goods. Public goods fulfill two criteria. They are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Non-rivalrous means that my using the good does not prevent you from using the good as well. Non-excludable indicates that providers cannot prevent people from using the good. The opposite of public goods are private goods, which must be either rivalrous or excludable. To clear up these labels, let us look at some examples. We want to identify whether each of the following goods would be considered public or private. A pizza giveaway at the beginning of a semester would be a private good. It is non-excludable, but it is rivalrous, since more than one person cannot eat the same slice of pizza. A McDonald's cheeseburger is a private good, as it is both rivalrous and excludable. A fireworks display is a public good. A concert at Madison Square Garden is a private good. It is non-rivalrous, but it is excludable. However, a concert in a city square would be a public good. Public goods lead to an unfortunate consequence, the tragedy of the commons. Goods given freely tend to cause people to abuse that privilege. Think about free samples at the supermarket. People are only supposed to take one, but for the tasty samples, people are grabbing multiple. Another example is buffalo hunting in the 1800s. The buffalo were almost hunted to extinction. So how to avoid this tragedy? Government limits. Another problem with public goods is the free rider problem, which is that the consumers of the good do not pay for the good. The producer must foot the bill. This is not always economically realistic. How then can the producer recoup their expense? There are three primary ways. The producer could start to charge for the good, which would no longer be a public good. The producer could appeal to the civic pride of the consumer, often in the form of quote-unquote suggested donations. The final way to cure the free rider problem is to directly ask for donations. Not all public goods are useful or helpful. An example of a negative public good is pollution. When companies attempt to lower their pollution levels, they must determine how much pollution to remove. The cost of this pollution abatement must balance the benefit the firm receives, either through good public relations or some other benefit. So if lowering pollution is up to individual firms, how can the government encourage pollution abatement? One method is punitive. Levy a tax if pollution exceeds a certain limit. The next method is more traditional. Tell companies how much pollution to abate. The final method to control pollution is marketable pollution permits. Here, the government decides on an acceptable amount of pollution nationwide. They then issue just enough permits so that level of pollution is created. The benefit of this form is that these permits are marketable or can be sold from firm to firm. This is actually how the Tesla Motor Company creates its profits. Since they create very little pollution, they sell their permits to other manufacturers. Sometimes, public and private goods have consequences, both good and bad. An external benefit is something good that happens to someone who does not pay for the good. This leads to underproduction of the good. For example, flu shots. Think about a small group of people, who we will name Al, Bonnie, Clark, Dana, and Emily. If Al, Bonnie, Clark, and Dana all get flu shots, why should Emily? She has no one from whom to catch the flu. It is also possible to have an external cost, which is something bad that happens to someone who does not purchase a good or service. An example of this, which we have already discussed, would be pollution.